Welcome back to Politics Tonight. Now let's get to our interview with the guests of the day. I am joined by a political scientist and a research associate professor at the Institute of African and Diaspora Studies, University of Lagos, Olukayode Suola, as well as a former staff with United Nations Mission in Darfur, Sudan, Professor Babafemi Badijo, for discussion on military coup in Gabon spreads panic in Africa. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, sirs.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. And good evening, Prof.
Good evening, gentlemen. So let's start. Let me start with Professor Isola. Just about 1 month after the Niger coup, the military struck in Gabon. Is this Arab Spring all over again?
Yes, that's what it is. You don't need the wisdom of Orunmila to identify that fact. And we might not even say that we're at the end of the matter. Only heavens know where this is taking us. There are several problems, as you know, that have brought us into this state of the world. And fundamental among the problems is that people are not in any way getting the promises of democracy. There's no analysis that we can give to it that will escape this fact. Nigerians, West Africans, Africans in general are not getting the promises of democracy. If this is true, as we all know, they are ready to seek alternative at any time. And that is why whenever there is military coup, the common people on the street, who are supposed to be the center of democracy, are the first to start jubilating. The jubilation does not mean that they support military coup or military governance, but because they abhor the kind of democracy that operates in their system, that is laden with very weak civil society, ethnicity, religiosity, nepotism, dictatorship, and foreign influence. Because they have all these problems in democracy, they will always ever support.
I have rejoined.
This is the reason.
So, Professor Badijo, if you can hear me, we have witnessed 7 military coups in Africa in the last 3 years, 4 in West Africa and 2 in Central Africa. Why is coup endemic in those 2 regions?
Well, I don't know if it is correct to say that it is endemic in those regions. The fact is that we have a lot of problems in Africa, and I've been emphasizing the fact that we face leadership deficit across the board in Africa, but more so in West, Central, East, and perhaps to some extent Southern Africa. So that leadership deficit and the level of corruption in the countries we are talking about has been producing the kind of experience we are having, in which the people who are more organized in terms of firepower are thrusting themselves on people as a way out of the morass of leadership deficit that we face. And within that leadership deficit, we also need to add the problem of external dynamics. Without looking at the external dynamics, we will not have a clearer picture. Of course, when you said, speaking about West and Central Africa, you're talking about largely Francophone countries in West Africa, Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, as well as Chad, Gabon. Of the 7 or so that you are talking about, 6 in Francophone Africans. So we need to look at how has been the manipulation of France in all this and the weakness of African leaders to wriggle out of it. And I must hasten to point out that those who came before those who are there currently had tried initially to wiggle out, and they were assassinated. And up till recently, there are still cases taking place on a more regular basis. So our leaders in the African countries sold out and decided to keep a good relationship with these powers of the West in general. And that has accounted for the dissonance between leadership that is only selfish and catering for itself and not providing or unable to provide for the generality of the people. What is the purpose of government? Government is something that we all put together and agree on a constitution. In many cases, had been put before, not everybody, but okay, we have the rules of, okay, there is constitution and let's go on with that constitution. Then we talk about the need to elect the people who are going to represent and make decisions on behalf of people. But it is really not election that is taking place, even in many of these countries. We are having selections taking place, either being foisted from the West or by the caricature of political parties that exist in many of these countries. But I think that we will be missing a lot of points if we continue to see democracy as just once you have elections, you have had democracy. It's not so. It's much more complex. The end point of having election is to ensure utmost freedom for people. And most important within utmost freedom are those basic needs of human beings to breathe, to drink water, and also to eat. And when all that is becoming difficult, it's on top of that that we add all those fundamental human rights and many other things that we find in the Sustainable Development Goals. If a government cannot deliver on all that, then you start asking, what is the purpose of governance? Why do we have so-called democracy, a la Western format? Because I should point out, the election of people, the government of the people, by the people, for the people, is taking place in different modes all over the world. But we are fixated on what we got out of the West at the end of colonization, and we are not ready to think about those who are performing elsewhere and are getting people, millions of people, out of poverty. But it doesn't matter for the West and our governments once they go to selection process and have leadership foisted. And when that is happening, you are bound to have reactions like you are having in the countries that you are pointing to. And that's not the end. It's not the end. You can have President Tinubu and ECOWAS and African Union and the United Nations and ECAS now in terms of Central Africa say whatever they want to say. There will also always be the restiveness of people.
All right.
And the military takes advantage of the restiveness of the people. It's not that the military are any better, don't get me wrong, because leadership deficit is across the board, even beyond politicians and the military in terms of what we face. We have that same problem in the religious sector. We need to ask ourselves, how come some of the people that we were colonized together are doing better, especially in Asia, but there is hardly anybody you can point to in Africa? Why is that the case? what can be done about some of that. But unless we address all those fundamental issues, we pretend that we are governing people because we have had elections and elections are rigged at will. Nobody is able to do anything about it. We get three candidates. I was listening to Singaporeans talking about their elections today. A lady was saying, I'm very happy. I was given three people to select from, and the best of the three won. You can't say that about much of Africa. We are normally presented the worst amongst us, and we have to select at the end of the day from the so-called political parties. And when all that happens, we are bound to have the kind of problems that we are facing.
All right, Professor Badijo. Professor Isola, help me with this. How is the Gabon coup different or similar to other coups that have happened recently in Africa?
Theoretically, I don't see any difference between the Gabonese coup and that other ones that have happened in West Africa. One fundamental thing runs across all the coups, whether you talk about ECOWAS or the one in Central Africa, place of Gabon. And that is part of what Prof just said. Democracy is a philosophy of governance. And that philosophy is simply that people have say in those who govern them. However, democracy is like clothing, or if you like, fashion. The environment in which you operate determines how you design your cloth and the kind of fashion that you subscribe to. So if you live in the Sahel, your fashion is likely to be different from those who live in a very cold region. I think that is fundamentally missing in Africa. The idea of democracy is great. We have bought into it. But we refuse to take into consideration the peculiarities of our own experiences as peoples of Africa. I mean, we tailor democracy sacrosanct, immutably, after some parts of the world. And then we came across this democratic system that we are practicing, either on the pages of newspaper or textbook. That kind of system cannot endure. A system of government or any system like that endures in a society because it is a product of people's lived experiences. So by now, what I expect ECOWAS and AU to be doing is to start utilizing the intellectuals across Africa to interrogate why we are having the problems that we are having. But then when you have a country where professors and intellectuals in the university are being owed 8 months' salary, they are not paid, and they are paid monies that are even not good enough to take anybody home. Are these the intellectuals you are going to invite to come and solve your problem? Or does that government even understand the role of the intellectual in solving the problem of the society? So beyond just looking at other factors that Prof has mentioned, we need to rework, reframe, restructure, quite fundamentally, the kind of democracy that we have in Africa. In fairness to Omabongo of his country, I cannot remember now. I watched one of his interviews somewhere where he was saying that a democracy in Nigeria or in Africa where a lot of work needs to be done in terms of fixing infrastructures, governance, crisis of identity, should not be the same with that which you have in, say, a place like the United States, where the president almost is jobless. He has nothing to do apart from making statements and then fixing issues across international communities. The two of these societies may be practicing democracy, but in terms of parliamentary structure, in terms of governance structure, in terms of the number of ministers, in terms of tenure of office, there must be fundamental differences in what they apply. Are we so intellectually lazy in Africa that we cannot even sit down, identify the problem, raise critical questions, and set objectives to rework our democracy to suit our own socio-peculiar, structures? Or we are just simply not interested in building our people? These are the questions that cut across all these countries that have been experiencing military rule. There is no difference. Maybe the difference you have is that a team of some countries will be found in West Africa and the other one in Gabon. Apart from that, the underlying factors are the same all across. So it's high time that ECOWAS and AU and every other international organizations that's involved began to be proactive. The word is proactive. I mean, when we listen to some of these popular musicians, we just dance away the music without noting the important things that they are talking about. In Teacher, Don't Teach Me Nonsense, Fela Kuti said, a teacher must correct the mistake of a student whenever it is observed. Now, AU is coming out to condemn military rule. ECOWAS is coming out to condemn military rule. But when leaders in Africa have been perpetrating themselves in offices, manipulating constitutions, manipulating elections, engaging in political violence, killing and maiming, all in the name of political struggles, what did ECOWAS do? What did AU do? Must these organizations just wait till things get out of hand before they start reactive responses towards the situation? Again, are we too lazy for these organizations to come up and find out what the problems are and help design the solution? We have universities, we have intellectuals, we have policymakers, we have diplomats that we can use to solve this problem, but we are not. Then after coup, you now wait and start suspending. Suspension means what?
Professor Isola, let me stay with you for a minute. I mean, just like Professor Bade just says, France is central to these countries with coup. What does this tell us? Is France the problem or part of the problem?
With due respect to Prof's opinion, I do not disagree that France is central. But then we have a proverb in Africa that we can utilize to explain the issue. If there's no crack in your wall domestically, who is France to come intruding upon the policies of Africa? France is just capitalizing on the ill-governed situation in Africa to penetrate the people, to perpetrate divide and rule, and then to turn the lives of the African people camera obscura. If tomorrow African leaders team up to identify the problems of their people, raise critical questions towards the problems of their people, and set out objectives to creatively and proactively address the problems of the people, France's influence or intervention or whatever nomenclature you want to give to it will fade away like just a melting point at any point in time. I don't see France as a major issue. If we address our domestic affairs, we will be able to solve the problem. I mean, a common sense proverb that goes around the street is that charity begins at home. When you have countries in a particular international or sub-regional organization, and those countries cannot even address their simple, economic problems at home. Security problems they cannot address. That country becomes a laughing stock. Whether it's going to be chairman of ECOWAS or is leading ECOWAS to war, nobody in the international community will take the country seriously. And then France will then capitalize on things like this. Of course, US will capitalize on things like this. And of course, Russia will capitalize on things like this to further penetrate the people. So who I will focus on is not France. I will focus on African leaders who have refused to sit down and theorize the problems of their people and then design solutions to be able to address this problem. That's the one I will. Of course, it's not different fundamentally from Prof's position, but beyond France, our people must take the bull by the horn. When they see that you are addressing your problem, when they see that you are serious with your people will in turn be loyal to you. Then external forces of whatever coloration that makes attempt to intervene will be suppressed even by the power of the people. Because in theory, every nation is supposed to be sovereign, and that sovereignty belongs to the people. But when you mess up the people who are supposed to hold your sovereignty for you, of course, external forces will have every opportunity to penetrate you and then destroy your polity. France is not the problem per se. Our leaders are the problem. If they sit up today and fix the political system, the influence of France will melt away almost unnoticeably.
All right.
That's my thinking.
All right. So, Professor Badijo, let me come to you. I mean, based on this trend, it would seem like democracy is becoming unpopular in Africa. I mean, some persons have even gone ahead to say democracy is superficial in Africa because the military never left. Is that the case?
Well, before I go to that, I would like to address two issues that cropped up in the discussion. And those two issues are fundamental. The African Union, United Nations, what have it, as international organizations, are not governments. I think there is an error in the Yoruba language when they call the United Nations Ijoba Agbaye. It is no Ijoba, it is no government. It has no powers other than whatever power its members give it. And you have a union of sovereign states. I worked for the United Nations for almost 24 years. But that's not all. I am an academic from University of Lagos and currently at Chrisland University, Abeokuta. So I do combine the two worlds and know what I'm talking about. Madeleine Albright told international servants to always remember who pays their salaries before they start to criticize United States. This was to Akashi when we were having the conflict in Macedonia in the 90s. So, in effect, there is very little that all these organizations can do because all these heads of states go to meet every year. And at that summit, they take care of themselves, pamper themselves, congratulate themselves. Diplomacy doesn't allow them to say anything negative about each other, and they are always making it appear like everything is super duper. There is no frankness about that. Then do you expect the chairperson of the African Union to now issue a press statement? Of course, even the ambassador of the African Union to Washington, D.C., Dr. Arikana, she felt that she needed to document what France was doing to its colonies. And she, on the basis of data, pointed out that France was taking $500 billion out of Africa annually. This is political economy. If you are taking $500 billion out of Africa and you are giving a paltry and saying you are giving aid, and our leaders are busy running around Paris, why is that possible? It's not something that is happening now. It is an agreement that was signed in order for France to give independence. Those who opposed were deposed and killed in a number of the cases. The first coup in Africa was as a result of Silvano Olympio wanting to have his own independent money for Togo. He was booted out, and Eyadema was put by France as a replacement. What was the experience of Patrice Lumumba in DRC, Congo? He was killed, and not only killed, burnt in ashes, and only a tooth was left, which was being. So when we are talking about the problems that these countries face, of course, I'm the first one to emphasize that leadership deficit is crucial. Corruption goes along with the leadership deficit for Africa. And if we cannot tackle those two, we won't even be able to address the external dynamics that are there. But those external dynamics must not be wished away as simplistic problems. They are there. In the case of the larger entities, you are dealing with IMF that is deciding what you do and what you don't do. In terms of the French, they actually post French officials as accounting agents in the ministries of these francophone countries. It's not. It's the pact. It's the pact that they signed at the end of colonization. Some of them have spoken out. Only a few of them. Mandela was called upon when he was still alive to help persuade the French not to take the tax that they were to pay in 1 year. And Mandela thought, wow, this is worse than apartheid. It's all documented. So we do have a major problem to face, and we must learn to work on two legs if we are to deal with this problem of the military re-entering and not wanting to go, because they are organized and they take advantage of people once they see that the people are disenchanted with the selection process that from the beginning give us the worst of us to lead us. And then after all that is done, they even rig it among themselves, whether it is just 2 or 3. And in Gabon that we are talking about, it is clear that we do have a palace coup, and not your ordinary type of coup, because the person who had overthrown in this instance is also the same family with the person he has overthrown. He was put there under trust as the head of the presidential guard. And as a result, Ali Bongo thought that he could push away his disability. And don't get me wrong, disability is not a reason for somebody not to be in office. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a paraplegic, and he did fantastically well for the United States because they also have very good structures, which makes me agree with the point Professor Shola was making, that the American president, given the structures and the institutions that have been built over time, doesn't have to worry. But push that aside. The guy was pushed aside and he's saying, make noise, make noise. Is it make noise that is going to solve the problem at hand? It's like the case of Bogwiba, who was pushed aside and put in a room and told every morning that he is president when somebody else was ruling the country. So you have that. And Aba, Ondo, Osat went into conflict, electoral conflict, and many are suggesting that he won, but it was declared that Ali Bongo has won all over again. And the reaction to all that was the people were getting ready and upset that their will is not done. And the cousin of Ali took charge and pushed everybody aside, and he's going to be sworn in on Monday. He's not saying, let us look at the election all over again, let us count the votes, but he is taking charge. So you're still having an extended member of the family in control after 56 years. So that's what is happening with respect to Gabon.
All right.